I am so glad you convinced me that the family car should be the Defender 110. It is so beautiful inside. It's so comfortable and it just feels indestructible.
Yes, it really is. I've been waiting a long time for the new model to come out. The Defender 110, I'm telling you, it's my favorite car of all times. It's my third one. You know, I have stories of going off road. The guy managed the group. He was like, "What are you doing in this beautiful car?" I'm like, "I'm going off road." He's like, "Are you sure? Because you can use one of ours." And then they look like Mad Max cars. I'm like, no, we're going to do this. And he was shocked.
Wow. Well, it's great because the Defender has been reimagined for 21st century adventure, and its unparalleled off-road ability as well as its robust interior are invaluable whether you're headed towards uncharted territory or just a weekend of exploration. The Defender 110 tackles challenging surroundings with absolute confidence. The SUV conveys strength outside and in, featuring peerless technology like an intuitive driver display and an award-winning infotainment system. That's my favorite part, to keep you connected no matter where the journey takes you. Adventure is unique to everyone, and so is the Defender. Choose from the two-door Defender 90, the four-door Defender 110, or the larger Defender 130 with the ability to seat up to 8 passengers. You'll find uncompromising performance in all three. So pack up and go even further with the Defender 110. Learn more at LandRoverUSA.com/Defender.
These days, we're all investors, trying to be smart with our money despite our worst impulses. But at iShares, we believe that deep down inside of every investor is a better investor. One that's just waiting to be let out. Explore iShares ETFs and insights and let your best investor out. Visit iShares.com for more information.
This isn't your average business podcast, and he's not your average host. This is the James Altucher Show. Today on the James Altucher Show.
So, this is going to be a very special episode, a very special Christmas episode of My Favorites. Has nothing to do with Christmas, though. It's just coming out around Christmas. But a lot of times it seems like just fun. Hey, I'm going to write a list of my 10 favorite sitcoms. I'm going to write a list of my 10 favorite heroes or my 10 favorite entrepreneurs, my 10 favorite movies or chess openings or whatever. But two things are important about each one of these episodes. One is, what lessons? Why are they your favorites? It can't just be because I like it. It's important to learn lessons from the content you consume. If Barack Obama's your hero, or if Richard Nixon's your hero, or if Neil Armstrong's your hero, or Sarah Blakely's your hero, why? What did they do that really made you think, oh, that's like a compass needle that I can start moving my life towards? I've never seen anybody do like what Sarah Blakely did. I love this aspect of her, so I'm going to start moving my life in that direction. I never saw anybody do that before. So what's the lessons? I'll give you an example. One of my favorite movies is Schindler's List. If you haven't seen it, I'll just talk about the very beginning scene, so there's no spoilers. But Liam Neeson, who's playing Oscar Schindler, World War II is about to start. He's doing nothing in life. He's a failed entrepreneur. He's a failed businessman. But he knows with war, there's opportunity. So he has just little packets of money around his dirty, grubby apartment. He gets all his money together. He buys the fanciest suit he could think of. He takes all his money. He goes out to the big restaurant where he knows all the German top generals are partying, and he just charms, and he acts like a rich industrialist, and he charms everyone, and he finds, women for everyone, and he takes tons of pictures for everyone, and he spends all of his money. And the next day he sends thank you notes to everyone. And then when it's time to bid for which company will make the bullets for the German army, he is selected. So I saw this movie, and whenever it came out, 1992 or 1993, that was a lesson for me, which is that, of course, there are much deeper, darker lessons in that movie. But just on the business side, I didn't realize business was not just about having the best product or having the most skills or having money in advance. The lesson was that business is about how you find out who the decision makers are and how do you charm them and win them over and so on. So that was one lesson among many from Schindler's List. This episode's not about Schindler's List, by the way, but it's just an example. Another lesson from that was Steven Spielberg that year put out 2 movies, Jurassic Park and Schindler's List. And I remember thinking when I was watching Schindler's List, like, how did this guy do such 2? I never actually have seen Jurassic Park, so I can't say if it's good or bad, but I know it made an enormous amount of money and lots of people loved it. But how did this guy make such 2 amazingly successful movies in 1 year? And it showed me that creativity might not have anything to do with quantity. Maybe you get quality from quantity. And maybe it was important for him to make 2 hugely successful movies. And he outsourced a lot of the things that he didn't want to do, for instance. And that's how he was able to do it. But anyway, this is not about Schindler's List, but Schindler's List is on my list of my favorite movies. So it made me think about that. And I'll discuss my favorite movies maybe on the next episode and the lessons I've learned from it. But just because something's your favorites, maybe you can actually switch careers. Like, and you could think to yourself, oh no, I can't switch careers. I'm 45. I've been a lawyer all my life. I've been an accountant all my life. I've been a plumber all my life, whatever you've been. And even though I'm kind of tired of it right now, being a plumber or whatever, I can't really quit now. This is where I built a career and so on. But it's important to realize there is a roadmap. There is a path to take a list of things that are your favorites and turn it into a new career for yourself. Even if you make a dumb list, my favorite sitcoms, my favorite toys, my favorite games, there is always some way to analyze it so that you can either be more successful in an area closely related to your list of favorite whatever, or even monetize it. And so this episode, it's complementary with the series My Favorite Things, because I'm going to talk about that no matter what your interest is, no matter what your passion is, no matter how old you are, no matter what degree of success you want, how can you analyze what is success in your what does success mean in a new industry, no matter what that industry is, and how do you break it down to find success in that industry, however you define success. And when you break it down this way, you may decide, okay, I don't want to do this, but maybe I can combine this with this breakdown with a breakdown in another industry, combine my interests. I know this is getting a little vague. Wait for the podcast. This started off, Jay and I were talking about what success is. And we started talking about, do you mean success as a person or success in a career? We broke it down. And then at that point, without me knowing, I was just lecturing in my usual way, Jay, the young Padawan, Jay Yao, and he hit record. And so before I knew it, we had an entire podcast that we were recording. So kudos to Jay for being a successful producer, moving up from being an already successful audio engineer. And here we go, which is how to find success no matter what your interest is. I mean, I would make $10, $100, $200, but it's not like I did comedy for the money. So
Right.
success is you get to perform more, you get people to laugh, you understand comedy more. Success in chess is as if you win games. Success in
Yeah, see, like that's success in general thing, right? But what is success in life? Which is like people like always think about like okay, if you have $1 billion, like Jeff Bezos, like to outsider views, yeah, he is successful, but like, do you think he really think he is successful himself?
I don't know, like was Tony Xi successful?
Oh, he did pass away, right?
Yeah, kind of in a bad situation.
Right. I don't know. I think, well, which is weird because I never heard about him before until he passed away. So like, do you consider that successful?
So you're saying fame is successful?
I don't know. That's why I've been thinking. Like, successful. Do you have to be famous successful, or do you like is successful just a self fulfillment? Like, what's how to define successful? So let's say if your parents, like, right, I'm Asian, right? I'm Chinese, right? So like naturally, my mom always, when I was younger, my mom's always like, hey, you have to be doctor, you have to be lawyer, you have to be engineer, so you can be successful in life. So let's say if I'm a doctor and lawyer and an engineer right now, am I really successful myself? You know what I mean? Even though if I'm happy, like, but does that consider it successful?
Yeah, I think if you're in general pretty happy, I think that's success.
Like, do you consider yourself successful right now?
Um, yeah, I think I'm pretty successful.
Right.
Because most things I do, but sometimes I'm unhappy. Success doesn't mean like happy all the time.
Right.
But then you kind of learn. You have to learn. I guess the thing is, success is being able to learn from every disappointment or every failure.
Right. Do you think success has like a flexible definition? Like,
Absolutely.
okay, so let's say I've done this, I'm successful right now, and then I'm just on to the new thing to feel successful again.
Yeah, I mean, let me ask you a question. Like, what's the difference between you being successful and also being a successful audio engineer? So, successful audio engineer, how can you measure it? Well, you can measure it by three ways, it seems. Money, how much money you make.
Right.
How important or famous are the clients you have? So,
Right.
like, if someone who can get any, if someone, and the reason I say that is because if someone's a famous musician, he can get any or she can get any audio engineer they want, and if they choose you, then
Right.
if your quality of your clients is going up, that's kind of a success, even if your money
Yep.
is not going up.
Right. Right.
And you can also be a successful audio engineer if you have more skills than other audio engineers. So I imagine there's lots of skills in audio
Right.
engineering.
Right. For sure. Yeah.
So
yeah.
ranging from all the equipment, all the software, and then just your ability to hear different shades of sounds, maybe even your music ability,
Right.
and so on. So that's three ways of being successful. So how do you judge if you're a successful audio engineer?
Right. Well, I mean, like, I felt like the quality of clients probably more important, right? Because like it's something that you can show to other people. Like you can't necessarily show like your money and stuff. What if I have money, but like I just don't really like to spend on like expensive things, right?
That doesn't seem like success because then your success relies on what other people think of you. So you're
Yeah,
so you're outsourcing your success, your feelings of success to other people who may or may not give a shit.
Right. So do you think winning an award considers being successful?
When I say are your clients famous, that's sort of like recognition of your peers in such a
Right.
way that it's true because they're actually hiring you. Okay.
Right.
They don't just say, "Hey, you're great," which is that seems a lower success than if they say, "Hey, can you work with me on my next album?" Right?
Right.
So an award is just like some group of people saying, "Hey, you're great," but it might even be a lot of people. It might be a vote. It might be a lot of people, but it still doesn't mean like let's say someone wins the Oscar for Best Picture, but for some reason no studio ever hires them again, or nobody ever talks about their movies.
Right.
Maybe they just got the award because who knows reason why, but then nobody really liked them after that. Or here's another question: is Woody Allen successful? So Woody Allen now is kind of sort of ostracized because of scandal. Whether the scandal's true or not, there's two sides that we've heard, and it's hard to know what to believe. But he won't be hired in Hollywood anymore. So that means he's not success, even though he's made, I don't know, 30 movies, and they were
Right.
almost all successes. His skill, he certainly had the skills. So maybe
Right.
here's a way to look at it. There's skills, domain, field. So to be successful in some, and then by the way, this has nothing to do with success personally. This is to be successful at X.
Okay. So it's like in a specific.
Yeah, so let's take audio engineering, or let's take podcasting, or let's take writing, or let's take business. And there's a difference between success, I am successful, and I am a successful X. I'm a successful writer, comedian,
Right.
entrepreneur, whatever. So there's a difference between the two. So let's separate them out for a second. And maybe they aren't different, but let's just see. So to be successful at something,
Right.
you have to be a success at the skills of that something. You have to be a success in the domain, and you have to be a
Right.
success in the field.
Right.
So let's say comedy. You're successful at comedy if you have skills, domain, field. So the skills of comedy are, you have to have a sense of humor, be good with a crowd. You have to be good at handling hecklers, moving around on the stage, being likable on the stage, and a bunch of other things. So that's the skills. You're successful at the skills of comedy is if you have all of those things.
But like, how do you recognize it? Like, so I felt like let's say the skill, right? So like, let's say if you're doing comedy for so long and this is the only thing that you write, you're sort of inside that square now. You can't really see outside the square. You know what I mean? You don't really know how.
Well, that's
your
why
skill
that's
comes
why
to other
with
people.
acting is one thing, but with comedy is another, because there's a very simple metric: is that are people laughing?
Ah,
So when you begin comedy, you might not have some of the skills. Like maybe you have a great sense of humor, but you're not good with crowd work. With some crowds, you might get everybody laughing, but with other crowds, they need to be talked to a little bit in order to warm up. And if you're not good at that, you might bomb. You might not do well. Nobody will laugh.
right.
Or if you're not good at likability, like if you go on stage and you're kind of like bragging about yourself, unless they sort of appreciate that, they're not going to really like you. You're not likable.
right,
You know, you have to be self-deprecating a little bit in comedy. So these are the skills of comedy, and it can be measured somewhat by success. Now, some people say a metric for success in comedy is laughs per minute, and you should try to get a laugh every 15 seconds, so 4 laughs per minute. But some comedians are like that, some aren't. Like Dave Chappelle is not really a laughs per second guy, but one would say he's got the skills because his jokes are very funny and he's very interesting and he tells stories. So that's why it's a little bit longer between each laugh. He's not like a one-liner kind of guy.
Right. I wonder if the metric can also include like after that that show, the people feel satisfied.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the skills. I think if you say something interesting that's also funny, then they'll remember it. Like,
Right.
so if Louis C.K., has a joke where you and I were kind of talking about this yesterday, but it came from a
Right.
Louis C.K. joke. Louis C.K. has this joke where he said the Christians won, and people yell out, "No, no!" And he's like, "Listen, what year is it?" And it's 2020, and like 20 years after what? And someone yells out, Christ. And then Louis C.K. yells, Christ. Yeah, Christ. So he just goes into this whole thing. So he's saying something interesting, that the Christian religion won the planet.
Right.
Even though, even the Muslims consider, and the Jews consider this year, and Buddhists, who have no idea, they didn't know who Jesus was 1,000 years ago. They consider the year 2020 because it's 2020 years after Christ was born.
Right,
so
right.
so this is an interesting observation. So you're more likely to remember an interesting observation.
Right.
And Louis C.K. makes these funny faces. He acts out, and does voices in his jokes. He has an element of absurdism. So he has all these skills. Like you could see, he works with the crowd. He moves around the stage in an interesting way. Dave Chappelle does interesting things with the microphone, like he hits his knee sometimes, to kind of signal to people to laugh. And so there's all these skills. So remember, it's skills, domain, field. So that's the skills. Now, what's the domain? You could be a really funny comedian, but nobody will ever know who you are. So the domain is, well, how do you get someone to book a gig? You have to be able to know how the domain works. Like, okay, first I'm going to do open mics, then I'm going to try to impress some managers and some bookers, then eventually get on stage. The domain is sort of like, what are the basics you need to do to get on stage and performing? Because that's a different skill than actually being a good comedian. Being able to know how to impress a booker or a manager is the domain of comedy.
Right. So domain is not. So the difference between domain and skill is that domain is an external skill,
Right.
like how to like networking and all that stuff.
But it still helps you because you got to know how to get on stage.
Right.
And you have to know, maybe afterwards you say hello to the audience, and or in podcasting, the domain might be, what kind of guests am I booking? Like, part of being a good podcaster is knowing what books are coming out next month so I can call up those authors and get them on my podcast. That's like the domain. And then there's the field of something. So the field of comedy, or the field of podcasting, and the field of writing. Being a good writer might mean telling a good story, understanding like how to write a page-turning plot. And the domain might be, well, I could write novels, I could write short stories, I could write screenplays. And then there's the field. The field might be, well, here are the top agents. Here are the top publishing companies. Here's the New York Times bestseller list. With comedy, okay, here are all the clubs in this city. I'm going to get to know all the owners. Here's the comedians that are the best, and I should try to, emulate their careers a little bit, at least in the beginning. With podcasting, the field might be, here's all the podcasting networks. Here's Apple iTunes. I should keep track of my chart ranking and see how I can up my chart ranking. Here's the latest deals in the podcasting space. Like, this podcasting company was bought. With writing, the field is, I just said it's like publishers and agents. With comedy, the field is, it might be, I need to get on Comedy Central or Stephen Colbert or, like I said, a Netflix special. With entrepreneurship, the field might be, okay, so the skills of entrepreneurship are coming up with an idea. How do you execute on that idea? Hire the right people, do marketing of your idea once it's built. The domain, now that I'm an entrepreneur, I need to incorporate my business. I need to get a place where everyone's going to work. I need to come with a business plan and show how much money I'm going to spend and so on. And the field is, well, what companies acquire a company like mine, or what companies can I do distribution deals with, or how do you contact all the venture capitalists? So, and you have to be good at all three things to be successful in any field. So audio engineer, what's the skills?
So the skills would be like, like the audio equipment and, recognize, like I said, recognize the sound, being able to record. I think what's more important is being able to identify what the client's style. You know what I mean? So let's say if I'm working with Lady Gaga and this Lady Gaga's music style, or if I work with you and then this is your interview style and all that stuff.
Okay, so that's some of the skills of audio engineering. You need to know like all the equipment. You need to have
the basic one,
You need to know all the options available for you. Like if they want a certain sound, how do you create that sound?
See, the other question is like, does the basic skill go into the skill in every field, right? Let's say in comedy, how do you make people laugh? There's sort of like the basic skill, right?
Yeah.
So like I felt like in skill, like if you incorporate basic skill, you just don't stand out enough than other people,
Right. So you have to be good to be successful. You have to be good at those skills. You have to be successful at X. You have to be the best or in the top 1% at skills, domain, field. So I'm assuming it's not just the basic skills that you're the best at skills.
Right.
So now what's the domain of audio engineering? What can you do with this skills? Like you could be an audio engineer of podcasting. You could be for musicians.
Post-productions, like for movie and TV shows and all that stuff. And also live sounds too.
Right. So that's the domain is like all the places where you could do what your skills are at. And to be good at the domain, you have to be able to get into those domains. Like you have to know, how do I work in post-production? How do I work with, what's the difference between working at podcasting versus working in post-production? And then the field, it's knowing the history of audio engineering. It's knowing who the best audio engineers were, like so you could emulate their career maybe. Where you want to work. Like you're in New York City, where's the best places to work? Who are the best clients? Like who regularly hires good audio engineers?
The best clients are James Altucher.
Yes. So you have to know that to be the best, truly the best audio engineer, you have to work on James Altucher's
Show.
podcast.
Yep.
But like you can't say someone's the best audio engineer if they're just sitting in even if they know all the equipment and they have all the skills and they have perfect pitch and everything. You can't say they're the best audio engineer if they're just sitting in their basement and they never work. Like so the best audio engineer is like Lady Gaga's audio engineer, and he's amazing and he has all the skills and every now and then he also works on Joe Rogan's podcast, he could do anything. So then you would say, oh my God, that's an amazing audio engineer. Stand-up comedian, has all the, like let's take Dave Chappelle, has all the skills of stand-up comedy, and he could do a TV show with this. He could do a Netflix special. He could just go up on stage and not even write any material and still be funny. And in the field, he can negotiate a $20 million deal with Netflix, or he could do a movie with HBO if he wants. So like that's the field, is the specific opportunities.
Right. I wonder if those, like the three things, is transferable between, let's say, like comedy to like acting, or let's say if like you skip the line, right? So let's say if you want to like do something else, I wonder if let's say if I'm an audio engineer, I wonder if I can transfer all that three, skill, domain, and field to other things.
Absolutely. Let's talk about that. So with skills,
Right.
Let's say I want to be a good investor. So first I think to myself, okay, well, I was an audio engineer and I got good at the skills, I got good at the domain, and I got good at the field. How do I transfer this to investing? First, skills. Okay, with audio engineering, when I think about if I'm good at the skills, I think, okay, am I really good with the equipment, a good sense of pitch and sound? Am I creative at coming up with new, interesting sounds that fit the style of the person I'm working with? And so there's all these sub skills. So in entrepreneurship, the first thing I do is I sit down and say, well, what are the sub skills of entrepreneurship? And like I said before, it's coming up with an idea, it's executing on the idea, it's hiring the right people. Maybe it's raising money. Maybe it's marketing. Maybe it's being able to sell a company. So those are the skills. So I need to learn those. And so coming up with ideas. Oh, this guy, James Altucher, says write 10 ideas a day and you get more and more creative. Maybe I need to learn, I want to be an entrepreneur in podcasting. So I need to study the skills of podcasting too, to learn about podcasting, or I need to learn how to execute. Well, maybe I need then to learn a little bit more about programming or how to hire programmers. Right. And I need to learn how to be persuasive. So I'll read some books on persuasion. You're transferring because you know what you need to do. You need to list the sub skills and then come up with a plan to get good at each sub skill. And then the domain, what kind of programming language I should use if I'm making a software product. Just like in the audio engineering, being good at the domain means you need to know all the potential things you can do and how to do them. So I could be a small entrepreneur, a big entrepreneur. I could say, well, Larry Page has Sergey Brin, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. Maybe I need a partner. So I need to know what are the possible types of entrepreneur and decide what fits my style the best, that will make me the most effective. And then the field, I need to know who are my competitors. So just like with auto engineering, you needed to know who are your competitors, where should you work, what are the best clients. I need to do the same exact thing for entrepreneurship. And the same with comedy. If I want to transfer from audio engineering to comedy, what are the best clubs to perform at? Who specifically are the owners or bookers of those clubs? How should I get in touch with them? How should I impress them? Right. I need to know the history of stand-up comedy. I need to know the history of investing, the history of entrepreneurship, because I needed to know the history of audio engineering. Like, there used to be people did audio engineering for 8-track tapes, and then CDs and DVDs, and now digital and MP3 and all that. This is rough, but I would say if you do those things, if you think about it in that way, that's the fastest way to be successful at X, where X could be anything.
See, I feel like that's a big team right there. Like it's so like with the skill, domain, and field, I feel like the biggest team is like knowing your history.
Yeah, for field, knowing the history is really important. So knowing, because like for every generation, chess is a great example. So, and we were talking earlier about why it's no good to just play mindlessly over and over again. Right. So Bobby Fischer, when he was, I guess he was like 13 years old, he was a top young player, but he wasn't like standing out necessarily. He was a good player, but he wasn't standing out. So he quit for a year. He dropped out. And during that year, he studied every single game played by professionals in the 1800s. And he came up with improvements on every single game. And then when he came back, he was playing these kind of boring openings because everyone's like, these are just from the 1800s. Everybody always thought those were very drawish, like you can't win with those openings. Right. But because he studied them and he came up with improvements, he started crushing everyone. He won the U.S. championship like 12-0, and he just started crushing everyone. He also learned Russian so he could read Russian chess magazines because Russia was so much better. He learned the history, and he learned, he said the Russians are the best players, so I'm going to learn their language. So he learned the language of the best players so he could study their stuff. That's studying the field. That's not improving his skills. Right, his skills is his ability to see 5 moves ahead, his ability to have good play and strategy. But he learned the field, and the domain is okay. I'm going to get good at playing in a tournament and the psychology of tournaments and stuff like that. The field specific, like I'm going to learn Russian. I'm going to study the games of Paul Morphy in the 1850s. The domain is I'm going to get in. I'm going to play in these tournaments. You get a ranking, and I'm going to move up in the ranking. And the skills are, learning how to play good chess.
Right. So I feel like there's something to unpack there too. Like how much do you want to win to willing to learn another language? to to learn. You know what
Well,
I
it
mean?
depends if you want to be successful or not.
Yeah.
And so I had this conversation with Anders Ericsson, who's the the developer of the 10,000 hour rule, which says with 10,000 hours of practice, you can be a success. So he's known for 10,000 hours of violin, 10,000 hours of chess, and 10,000 hours of golf, and you'll be successful at those things. But in those domains, there are metrics. Like with violin, are you playing first chair, second chair, or third chair in the orchestra? Chess, there's a ranking. Golf, how much over par or under par can you perform? We discussed some metrics for audio engineering. Entrepreneurship, the metrics could be number of customers, or metrics could be how much your company is worth. So with comedy, he wanted to know what the metric was. Is it laughs per minute? Is it how much money you make? Is it whether you get more Netflix specials? So it was unclear, because that's a little unclear. But still, pick some metric or some set of metrics, and you're either a success at those metrics or you're not. And so, yeah, maybe somebody wants to go up on stage once a year, and that's good enough for them. They don't want to be a successful comedian, but they just enjoy it. It's like a hobby. They want to go up once a year. Or audio engineering, they know about it, but it's not like they really want to make a career as an investment banker, and then just on the hobby on the weekends do audio engineering. So if you want to be a success, you have to be a success in the field, when the field is all about the metrics of success. Like, here are the best competitors, here's the best clubs to perform, here are the top clients to work for audio engineering. In the field area, there's the metrics by which you define some sort of external success. In the field is where you care what people think of you.
Right. So do you think field it's more important out of all that three?
No,
I know
skills.
Skills is more important. Wow.
You cannot be successful at anything if you don't have the skills. But you can't be successful either if you don't know the domain or the field. But at the very least, you have the skills.
The skills, right?
Like so the skills sort of suggest anytime you want, you can start being successful at this. But if you just know the domain and field, you can't be successful if you have no skills.
Right.
Like, I can know everything about the domain of basketball and the field of basketball, but never be a good basketball player. But if I have the skills of the best basketball player in the world, then I could just go to a professional team and say, look at me, I'm dunking every ball, and you're hired. They'll hire you.
Right, but I felt like if you're successful, so if you're good at the field and domain of a basketball, you can be something else than a basketball player.
Right. So what are your skills then? So like the example of Matthew Berry is really good. Like, he loved sports, right? And let's just say he loved football. Well, he was 35 years old, and he had been a writer for so many years. He wasn't really ready to be a professional offensive lineman in the NFL. Right. But his skills were in writing. And in the domain, it's not just playing. There's being an agent, there's being a manager, there's being a coach, having a fantasy sports league. So he decided, you know what? I've looked at all of these. I understand all of these. I understand a lot about the NFL. I'm going to be really into fantasy sports. And in the field, he said, okay, there's these 10 blogs about fantasy sports. There's no good writers. I have this skill in writing. So I'm going to take out the skills of playing football, but I'm going to move in the skills of writing, and I'm going to take out the domain. I'm going to switch the domain from playing in football to playing fantasy sports. And in the field, I'm going to find all the bloggers who blog about fantasy sports, and I'm going to ask if I could blog for them. My ultimate goal is to be an anchor at ESPN and maybe build a company on fantasy sports. So that's how you combine.
Right.
So if you're an audio engineer, but you don't necessarily want to be the standard audio engineer, because that might be a big field and you want to get into something new. Maybe you say, well, you know what? I have all these skills in understanding podcasting, so I'm going to replace the skills part of audio engineering with the skills of podcasting, and now I'm going to be knowing the skills of podcasting, but knowing the domain and field of audio engineering. I'm going to be a successful audio engineer in podcasting. This is more like idea sex. It's like, I'm going to take the domain from one area, field from another area, and skills of another area, and now I can be something unique.
Right. So this is almost like the Scott Adam and James Altucher has a baby.
Yeah. So it's sort of like that. It's the idea sex of the talent stack and idea sex.
Yeah, you still have the talent stack.
Well, I take entrepreneurship. Like I might know the domain and field of podcasting really well, but maybe I have the skills of an entrepreneur. Maybe then I could say, I know the domain really well. So here's all the best podcasters, here's the types of podcasting, and so on. And I know the field very well. Like, okay, there's podcast distributors, there's podcast analytics companies, there's podcast networks. I'm gonna use my skills as an entrepreneur. I'm going to use the domain of podcasting, and I'm going to look at the field of podcast networks, and I'm going to build a company that's the best podcast network.
Right. Yeah, see, I think this is very, very, very useful because, like, so let's say if someone's at home, like, kind of like stuck at, like, okay, I want to be a whatever marketing manager or whatever, and they're kind of stuck, like, oh, I'm not good enough at this, but I'm good enough at this. Now they should just start to think, like, okay, maybe I shouldn't set my ideal so narrow only to see this thing. I should open up my view, like, okay, maybe I should call myself, or I should change my narrative a little bit. Rather than just being the
Right.
best, salesman or whatever, I should be like the best in that field.
Right. So for instance, let's take, because you can really determine what your ideal career should be using this methodology. Now that I think about it, let's take entrepreneurship for example. I have the skills of an entrepreneur, and I know this because I've started many companies. I've sold some of them. I've been a successful entrepreneur, and I've also been on the boards of many companies. So again, that's part of the domain. I could be an entrepreneur. So the skills are all the skills we outlined before.
Right.
The domain is I could be an entrepreneur. I could be a board member. I could be invest in entrepreneurs or whatever. And the field is here's where I find programmers. Here's where I find venture capitalists. Here's the best entrepreneurs out there. Here's the companies that buy entrepreneurs. So now I have the skills of an entrepreneur, except for the fact that I'm not that good at following up. Not that social. Like I don't really enjoy running into people in the morning and managing them. I'm not really good at. I'm not confrontational, so I don't really enjoy like confronting anybody. In particular, if you have 100 employees, you're gonna have your whole day is confrontation.
Right.
So perhaps I shouldn't be an entrepreneur. So if you take out the fact that I know a lot about entrepreneurship, but I'm not good at some of the social aspects, well, now that I know the domain, I can also say, well, maybe I could be an investor. I'm swapping out the domain and the fields of entrepreneurship, and I'm saying, okay, well, how do I find the domain is, these are the criteria that make a good investment. How do I find investments? And the field is, here's the people who I usually follow for investing. Here's how I find, here's the conferences I go to find investing. Here's how I invest. Like I go on the stock exchange or I go on the exchanges where venture capitalists go and so on. So you could determine, this is a better thing for me to be successful at if I want to be truly successful, because I don't really want to learn. I'm not really passionate about learning the social skills of entrepreneurship, even though I have them. If I need them, I don't like it.
Yeah, I think it's so good because like this is almost like you can kind of create like a side hustle from this as well. Like, so let's say if you're at home, right? Like you even if you're really happy or whatever, you're making a lot of money, you can still sit down and write down, like the skill, field, and domain, right? Just write it down and then write what you're good at in each one, using how, and when.
What are you good at?
Yep.
What are the possibilities given that you're good at this? And then what are the specific things in the field that will enable you to either make money or have fame or have what you consider a success? Field is more how you can measure success. Skills are so you could get success, and domains in the middle to kind of connect you between the skills and the field.
Yeah, see, once you write it down, and then it's like math, right? It's like S plus Y plus Z equals to question marks, right? So let's say you just replace any one of them, your question marks always change.
Yeah.
So let's say if you're really, really, like you said, if you're right now, you really, you are a successful, entrepreneur, you have a startup, you have a good amount of money, you're like, okay, I'm really good at all this thing. Maybe I can swap out one thing and become an investor. And so now you have two things going on in life rather than just one.
Right. Well, but also you might have the skills of entrepreneurship, but now you need to know the domain and the field of investing. So for instance, I might be a good entrepreneur, but if I want to be an investor, let's go to the field for a second. I need to read the history of investing. I need to, more important than the domain of entrepreneurship, I need to know, well, do I invest with options? Do I invest with stocks? Do I invest in private companies? Like, I'm a good at, so what's the best thing in the domain for me, given that I'm the best at the skills of entrepreneurship? I might not be the best at the skills of investing, but I'm so good at the skills of entrepreneurship. But I don't have like the skill of day trading, for instance.
Right.
So it might be the case then, okay, knowing all the possibilities of the domain of investing, not the domain of entrepreneurship, but the domain of investing. Oh, okay, I could invest in entrepreneurs by investing in private companies or venture backed companies. Now, and then the field is, I actually might need to have the field of entrepreneurship rather than the field of investing. Well, I need a little bit of both, maybe, because I need to know how to find investments, but I also, but more importantly, I need to know how to sell companies. I need to use my skills as an entrepreneur to help these people sell companies and so on. It depends
Right.
on what type of investor. Am I passive or active? Am I going to be on sitting on the board, or am I just blindly investing? In which case, it's better to know the field of investing. Oh my gosh, I love these clothes. Mizzen and Main. That's Mizzen and Main. It really is the most comfortable work clothes. Travel clothes. I had to travel this whole week. I'm traveling for a week and a half, and I just took Mizzen and Main clothes with me. Close out 2023 in style with comfortable, breathable, packable, and machine washable pieces from Mizzen and Main. As you wrap up your year-end goals, enjoy a Mizzen and Main dress shirt that you can wear confidently. I like that they've very, very just nice, solid colors. I don't really like to get all fancy in patterns and everything, although they do have some pattern shirts, but very comfortable clothes, stretchable pants. It's just super comfortable, but they look professional, and you can wear them casually or professionally. I like some of their flannel shirts or untuck shirts. I love untuck. I never tuck in. So again, whether you're shopping for a special someone or giving yourself the gift you really want, I just buy myself gifts. Mizzen and Main is the perfect gift for any guy who works, travels, and or cares about looking and feeling great. As you could tell by my many photos across the internet, I care about looking fantastic. I'm practically a model. And let's be honest, every guy loves to look great. So again, shop now at mizzenandmain.com and save 20% when you spend $130 or more using promo code James. That's promo code James at Mizzen and Main, Mizzen and Main.com. You know what I love about fantasy sports is that even though I'm not going to be a great basketball player or a baseball player or a football player or whatever, I feel like I get to participate and make decisions and use my knowledge of these different leagues or these different sports to compete. So it's like I can pick my team or I can pick my favorite players, and I could use my knowledge to make predictions and maybe even make money. So with the basketball season here, you can now pick combo projections across football and basketball from the Specials League on Prize Picks. This is a league created specifically for combo projections that include two or more players from different sports or leagues. Want to play alongside some of Prize Picks' favorite players like rapper Meek Mill and comedian Andrew Schultz, who's also been a guest on this podcast, and I've been a guest on his? You can now find community plays under the promos tab of the app to view entries for some of the biggest names in the Prize Picks community each week. Look, Prize Picks even offers a reboot policy so that your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, that player is rebooted. Prize Picks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. What? So I love playing it. I love anywhere where I can use analytical ability with my interests to demonstrate some skill and maybe make some money. And I like the game-like aspect. I do wish they had chess as a category on prizepicks.com, but I'll settle for what they've got. Maybe I should make my own fantasy chess league. But in any case, I love Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/James. Use code James for a first deposit match up to $100. That's the easiest $100 you're ever going to make. So that's prizepicks.com/James and use code James. Daily fantasy sports made easy.
the future of learning is definitely online. Like, it's such BS that you have to spend $200,000 or take $200,000 in loans and go to some fancy school when it's useless. It doesn't guarantee you a job. Most employers, including me, do not care about degrees or grades or anything like that. We want to care that you love what you're doing, that you know what you're doing, in some cases that you have experience or that you're willing to learn. But people in general love learning and are curious. Like, the key to success is curiosity. And I think masterclass.com is the perfect model for online learning. I'm really happy they're sponsoring this episode. If you're going to give a gift, give the gift of learning. Masterclass makes a meaningful gift this season for you and anyone on your list, because both of you can learn from the best to become your best, from leadership to effective communication to cooking. Let me tell you some of the classes I've taken. I've taken comedy from Steve Martin. I mean, can you believe I can take a class from Steve Martin on comedy, or Judd Apatow, my favorite comedy director? I could take an actual class from him on writing. Wolfgang Puck on cooking. Dan Brown on writing, or Judy Bloom, who's been on this podcast, on writing. By the way, Wolfgang Puck also has been on this podcast. It's such a pleasure. I try to take classes all the time from masterclass.com. And whether you're watching Masterclass on TV or listening in audio mode in the app or on their site, the quality speaks for itself. It's like these Masterclass instructors are your own personal mentors that are going to help you reach the next level. How much would it cost to take one-on-one classes on comedy from Steve Martin or on chess from Gary Kasparov? You just wouldn't be able to do it. But it would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. With a Masterclass annual membership, it's $10 a month. Memberships start at $120 a year for unlimited access to one-on-one classes with all 180 plus Masterclass instructors. So it's not just $120 for one instructor. You get all 180 plus Masterclass instructors. Boost your confidence and find practical takeaways you can apply to your life and at work. And if you own a business or are a team leader, use Masterclass to empower and create future-ready employees and leaders. That's the real education in today's world. So this holiday season, you can give one annual membership and get one free at masterclass.com/JAS. JAS, of course, stands for the James Altucher Show. So right now you can get two memberships for the price of one at masterclass.com/JAS. Masterclass.com/JAS. Offer terms apply.
This is such a good life anchor too, because like if you write all this down, you can clearly see what you're good at, what you're bad at, or what you want to do. And also, after you write everything down, you're sort of like, okay, this is all the possibilities I can do. Now I know what I need to learn next.
And now, exactly, this is a good roadmap, and people don't think this way.
Right.
So they're
Boom.
like,
Yep.
so they think, oh, I want to get good at basketball. I'll just play a lot and I'll get better. No, that's not how it works. And then somebody says, okay, well, I'll get a coach and I'll get better. Okay, you might get great at basketball, but then what's next? Do I play in the street? Do I go to the NBA? Do I go to another? Like, then you have to know, to actually do it professionally, you need to be good at the field and again, good at the domain. So to be able to do something, like, again, if I was, let's say, the best stand-up comedian in the world, but I'm just like hanging out telling jokes in my apartment, that's no good for me. I need to know, oh, let's go to a local comedy club, and here's what I need to know in order to get booked by the comedy club. And then the field, of course, is a much bigger expansion of that.
I wonder if that also can sort of map out how you should learn as well.
Exactly, because, well, let's take skills for a second. There's no one skill stand-up comedy, but like I said, there's humor, likability, crowd work, and so on. So you list the sub-skills, and you ask, how do I get good at crowd work? Well, maybe every time I'm in an elevator, I try to make the other people in the elevator laugh. How do I get good at telling a joke? Well, maybe I watch some comedians and, learn about punchlines and, start writing every day and practice those skills. How do I get good at likability? Well, you talk to your friends and you act in different ways and you see which makes you more likable or not. Anyway, I'm just making this up, but this is maybe, you have to list the sub skills. Now, in domain, how do I act? What do I do next? How do I actually get booked on a stage? And so if you get really good at that, you can perform all over town. But if you don't really know the field, you're going to see, oh my God, my this guy who's not as good as me just got a Netflix special. How do I get that? Now you have to know the field. You have to know also, you have to know every comedian out there and say, oh, he's got this style, it's going well. He's got this style, it's going well. He's got this style, he's really funny, but he's not getting professional success because he's a little politically incorrect. So that's how you know the field and what you need to do to be successful in the field. So it is a roadmap to success if you break it down in these three ways.
Right.
So and let's think about now if this connects to how do I know if I'm successful just as a human being?
Right.
And so the skills of being a human being are you know anybody can make stuff up here, but I'll say my definition. Everyone can have a different definition, but are you physically healthy? If you're physically healthy, that's a good first step of being, successful as a human being. You're given this body, and if it's sick, that seems less successful than if it's healthy. If I'm in good relationships as opposed to bad relationships, that seems more successful. If I'm very creative versus not being so creative, and creativity, every event in history that we know about was done because of some creative act. So creativity seems important, and having some sense of spirituality, meaning I'm trying hard not to waste too much energy on regret, and I'm trying too hard not to waste too much energy on anxiety. So that's like spiritual health. And then along with that are things like, oh, do I have good friends? Well, that's part of relationships. So I have good friends.
Right.
And then if I have creativity, I have that probably means I'm improving at something, because every time I'm more and more creative, I'm improving at something. So all these things, this seems to be foundational skills to success as a human. Well, what's the domain of being human? Well, okay, I'd like to have a wife or a husband, and I want to have good kids, and I might decide I want to have a good career, or I might want to decide I want to have a very minimalist lifestyle. So this is the domain. These are the kinds of human I could be. And then the field of being human is, maybe, money you need, or again, I don't know. I guess it's a little complicated on an individual level. What's the field of being human?
Right. Like what about living comfortably? Like you might not need a lot of stuff, like as long as you're not stressing about anything, right?
Certainly it seems, if you know the field, let's say the field of being human is, okay, here are all the colleges I could go to, here are all the companies I could work for, here are all the possible careers, here are some metrics to judge success, whether it's money or fame. So that's like the field. And the domain is, this is a house, this is a wife, these are babies.
Right.
These are the kind, some people have a career, some people don't, some people are famous, some people are, that's like the domain of human. And then those foundational skills I mentioned. All right, now, if you don't have those foundational skills, it doesn't matter if you know the domain or field. So you always need the foundational skills. But if all you are is healthy, have some good friends, you're creative, and you're not anxious, you'll probably have a pretty enjoyable life, but you might not be super famous or have a lot of money or impress a lot of people. You might not be successful in that sense, but you could judge success if you're simply just good at the skills of being human.
Right. Like how like we actually talked about before, like mentioned before, like how like fields kind of tie into history. Like I wonder if there's any history like we should know or we could like follow or copy. You know what I mean?
It's important to know history because that can help you. And again, a field is also more about what other people think of you. But here's why reading history is in the field section. So let's take this last election. Everyone said this election is the most important election in all of history. And then if you go to newspapers.com and you search the phrase most important election in all of history, you see that ever since 1800, every single election said this was the most important election in all history. So if you know the field of human discourse, like, okay, I'm going to argue with people on Twitter and Facebook, but they're all telling me it's the most important election in human history. Maybe they're right. It's interesting to know to read the history and see, oh, they're just saying the same thing everyone's been saying for 200 years. They obviously don't know their history, and I do. And there's a good chance they're wrong because everybody always says this. And I don't even really need to argue with them. It's just a stupid argument. So knowing the history allows you not to repeat it. You won't say this is the most important election in all history because people have been saying, I know the history of the election of 1860. I know the history of the election of 1800. And so I can think of other elections, and that's pleasurable too.
Man, I felt like knowing the history also make you a less angry person.
Yeah, because then again, you don't repeat the mistakes.
Right.
People say, if you're not outraged, then you're not doing enough for the rights of people.
Right.
But understanding, having a good solid basis in the skills, like let's say your emotional relationships, you would know that people who are outraged, who are angry and upset, tend to not make the best decisions. That's just millions of research have been shown that if you're angry or afraid or outraged, you're not going to make optimal decisions.
Also, they live like shorter life, right, or something.
Yeah. So understanding. So let's say I want to be, some sort of activist. I will know by knowing the history of activism, but also having the skills of emotional health that, what they just said doesn't sound like that will make me a successful activist. It's not outrage. It's, understanding logically what is going wrong, what are possible solutions, and how to execute on those solutions rather than just screaming in the streets and looting and stuff like that. So this is not, by the way, I'm not saying anything against the protests that are happening now. This, there are some people there who are logical, reasonable, rational. Martin Luther King, logical, reasonable, rational. He understood being outraged wasn't the most effective way to have protests. So out of all the potential Martin Luther Kings out there, many of them were outraged, and he wasn't, and that's why he became the most successful in history at fighting for equal rights. So again, thinking in terms of skills, domain, field would help someone even become, a better activist or a better congressman or a better debater. Like if someone starts yelling at you, take a step back and say, what are we really arguing about? Like, we're supposed to be having a debate, not an angry argument. And again, it'll make you a more effective debater and questioner and more curious about solutions if you're not outraged and clouded by outrage.
And usually when you're outraged or angry, you often say the wrong stuff too.
Yeah, or like let's say you're afraid of something. You could also know, but this isn't the best time for me making a decision. Like let's say I just lost my job and my uncle has always been asking me to work in his accounting firm and I'm scared. So I just call him up and say, yes, I'll work in your accounting firm. That might not have been a good way to make that decision because I was scared. And again, being a successful human, knowing skills, domain, field would help me to make a better decision in that case.
Man, I felt like what people should do is they actually should write down their own version of, like skill, domain, and field, and then they should just tweet at you, and then, you should see them.
Yeah, no, or put it on like an image and take a snapshot of it, and
just write it.
Yeah, because or write it down on a pad and then take a screenshot because it might be too much for too many characters for the tweet.
Right. Yeah, because then you will have enough data to sort of like sort of fine tune it. Yeah, like the first time you write it, maybe not as good. If you write it 10 times, then you would really know what you should do next.
It's like when we've done podcasts about chess, like after the TV show The Queen's Gambit, this is a very clear one. Like the skills, let's say people watch The Queen's Gambit, they're like, I want to get better. So the skills are, of course, understanding like how the moves work and how to see a few moves ahead, understanding how the game opens up, understanding strategies in the middle of the game, understanding the end game. So those are the skills. Right. And then the domain is, well, I could play in tournaments now, or I could play online. I could maybe write about my experiences learning, do a podcast interviewing chess players. This is the domain. And then the field, if I decide, I'm going to be a player, the field is, okay, I'm going to get Chess Life magazine. I'm going to see all the tournaments that are listed. Here's how the rating system works. Here's the big tournament if I want to get a master's ranking. So that's the field. So again, no matter what you want to learn or succeed at, one way or the other, you have to directly attack skills, directly attack domain, directly attack field. And I see it in every industry I've ever been in, and I've been in a lot of different industries. The people who are good at only skills or only good at domain or only good at field, they never hit success. Right. Chess is a great example. There are people who play in Washington Square Park in New York City all day long, and they have great skills. They would be a great tournament player. They might be even grandmaster level, like they're so good. But they're just playing in the park, and they're homeless because they never understood the domain in the field. It's not like people are going to, no one, and this is related to choose yourself. No one's just going to go to the park and say, oh my God, you're amazing. I'm going to make you the #1 chess player in the world. That's never happened ever. If someone says to a kid, hey, you're really funny, you should go on this TV show. That never really happens. Or if
Right.
it does, it's extremely rare. Like, no one's just going to bless you with being the best in the world unless you yourself know the domain and the history and the field and all these things.
Man, it's almost like a journal that you have to journal almost every week.
Yeah, because
Like,
it could
to
change
see
too.
improvements. Yep.
Because here's the thing too. Let's say you want to be successful and you think at the beginning success is this. Well, after you've learned for 2 years, you might realize, when I didn't know anything, I thought success was X. But actually, now that I've been doing it for years, it turns out success is actually, ABC instead of XYZ. Like, as you learn more, your definition, like for instance, before Bobby Fischer learned Russian, he didn't know at all that his actual goal was to learn certain strategies that the Russians had already mastered. He didn't even know those strategies existed.
Right. Yeah, that's so valuable because like, like your success definition change based on how much you know about the field and industry.
Right.
And domain.
So people always ask me like, well, what are your goals? You can't really know your goals because every day you improve, your goals might change every single
Right.
day because you understand, the goal I had before, that was an inaccurate goal. For instance, if my goal was to make $1 billion, well, as I learn more about the field and domain of money, I might realize, what did I need $1 billion for? I could pay for everything I want with much less. And so your understanding of all your goals might change. Or if your goal is to be a famous actor, you might realize, I just really love acting. And the more fame I get, I seem to be kind of unhappy or anxious. Again, then this is related to the first thing is you always have to have your foundational human skills. And if your relationships are getting worse and you're anxious, it might change your goals.
I felt like now is like the best time to do it right now too, because like, I'm sure a lot of people are working from home right now, and also, some people might lose their job, so they might have a little bit more time on hand. This is something that you can control. You can actually take up paper and write down what you're good at.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you could take anything. So I was on a podcast yesterday. It was with this guy from the stand-up comedy world. He used to not only perform a lot, but he also booked a lot of shows at Caroline's, which is one of the most successful comedy clubs ever. We've had Caroline Hirsch on this podcast before. So I was on Ray Gutz's podcast, and during this pandemic time, you can't perform comedy really, particularly in New York City is all closed. So he looked at other things he was interested in, and he's like, I'm interested in movies, and specifically all the Disney movies, which include Disney movies, Pixar movies, Marvel movies, Star Wars movies. And so he's doing every single episode, he analyzes a different Disney-owned movie. And so I was on the podcast because we had just watched WALL-E, and he wanted to not only with me analyze the movie WALL-E, but also relate it to my article about New York City being dead and how the parallels between that article and what's happening in WALL-E, which, this is not a spoiler, but WALL-E starts off with the Earth just being this heap of trash with nothing alive on it. So this is a case where he decided, okay, I've got these comedy skills, but this is related to this fact that this podcast is called My Favorites. It's not just one category you have your favorites in. Right. He listed his favorite Disney movies. Okay, now given that he listed it, what's the domain? Because he has his experience with the domain of comedy, he understands the domain of comedy. You can share content through a podcast, through a TV show, by giving a talk about it, which is the equivalent of stand-up comedy, by writing a book, and all these things. And he decided, using his skills at comedy, the domain for sharing information about his favorite Disney movies would be a podcast. Just like Matthew Berry wanted to share his love for sports in blogging. He looked at the domain of how he can use sports, and blogging was a viable part of that domain. And then it's the field of, okay, well, what do I name the podcast? Are there any podcast competitors out there doing this? If so, how can I make it switch so that I'm a little different? And so the way he does that is by having people like me on to help him analyze and to relate it to other things happening in the real world, as opposed to just breaking down scene by scene each movie. He relates it to things in the real world, so it becomes. And he even said to me, it's like, part Joe Rogan, and he named some podcast that's just about movies. So he understands the field, so he's able to combine ideas from different podcasts. Right. And so that was how he survived and thrived because his podcast is doing very well. That's how he survived and thrived when he couldn't do his first choice field, which was stand-up comedy. But he had the skills of it. And by listing his favorites, by looking at his, every time we list our favorites, that there is a domain that we can make money and do something in. So if I list my favorite baseball players, maybe I could write a book, the top 10 baseball players of all time, or whatever, do fantasy baseball or something, or maybe I can gamble on it. Who knows? We had that the gambling guy on a few weeks ago.
Yeah. Mark Edelman.
Yeah.
That's his name, right? Yep.
Yeah. So that's why this is so understanding things in terms of skills, field, domain is like, let's say I am my skills are as an entrepreneurship, and now I'm listening to this podcast, and I'm gonna write my favorites, my favorite, my favorite books. Now, the domain of entrepreneur, how do I combine, what's the domain of entrepreneurship with books? Maybe I create a new kind of e-reader. Maybe I create the company Blinkist, which summarizes all my favorite books. Maybe I create an online bookseller, which is cheaper than Amazon. Maybe I become a book reviewer. Maybe I write a book. Like there becomes also, or maybe I help, like I do what Tucker Max did. He had skills as a writer, and now he created a publishing company that helps other people who aren't writers write their first book. So that's understanding the domain and then understanding the field. I can combine entrepreneurship with whatever my favorites list is.
Right. I think that's very useful. It's kind of crazy, like how we just started talking about success. Do you have that three things already in mind?
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about because I've had to get good. Like, look, we're making a business right now. We're making a podcast software business, kind of like the software we're using right now to talk to each other and record this podcast. And so, first of all, I have skills as a podcaster, so I know everything that I need. I've been doing podcasting for so long. I know everything I need for as a podcaster. And so the domain is having the skills helps me with the domain. So the domain, I need good audio quality, good video quality, good chat. Maybe I need a soundboard in the software itself because I know I need a good audio engineer, and you, the audio engineer, are telling me you would like a soundboard and some other things. And I also have the skills of entrepreneurship, so I know how to ask these things about what I need. Now, the domain is, okay, do I make my own podcast software? Do I sell or do I share ideas with Zoom? Do I write articles about what I need in podcast software? Well, since I also have skills as an entrepreneur, I decide I'm going to make my own podcast software. Now, the field is, who are my competitors? What are they up to? Why haven't they done what I want to do? Because obviously any good podcaster is going to want to do what I want to do. By the way, I don't really need to validate the idea because I'm the one who would use the software at the very least. And I know I'm a good podcaster. Knowing the field means, okay, well, why wasn't this made 10 years ago? Why wasn't this made 20 years ago? Well, that's the history of bandwidth on the internet.
Yep.
And then what I do is, why didn't Zoom make this? Well, I can look at the resumes of the top programmers at Zoom, and I can look at the job listings. What kind of programmers is Zoom looking for? So then I could see what features they're probably using. My experience in podcasting and in software, I could see what features they're probably doing in the next version of their software and see if it competes with me and how much time I have to make my software. Knowing the field is also, which companies am I going to distribute with? Should I call up Time Warner or AT&T and say, hey, let's stream your shows, or should I call up the best podcast? I know all the best podcasters. I say, hey, try this out. I know the venture capitalists. Hey, try this out. I know the companies buying podcast software companies, so I could contact them. So, this is where I'm combining the skills, domains, fields of podcasting and entrepreneurship, but using that approach is the best way to develop a product.
Yeah, see, like now that you mention it, I don't know if this is relevant, but writing all that down, you can also know what's your unfair advantage.
Yeah, right. Because it might be the case that if I look at the resume, for instance, if I look at the resumes of one of the top podcasting software companies, I could say, there's a lot of people who are good at data crunching, but there doesn't seem to be a lot of people good at making audio, who are
Right.
audio experts on their resumes. And so I could have an unfair advantage by hiring good programmers who are not just good at like internet programming, but good at like systems programming.
Right. You can also look at like what's your own unfair advantage in terms of like, okay, I know this skill that I intentionally learned like a long time ago. It's just like Steve Jobs, right? That's how, because he took the calligraphy
Yeah,
class.
calligraphy, right.
Yeah.
So he had an unfair advantage by he knew he was a better designer
Yeah.
of things than
The
Bill
UIs.
Gates, for instance.
Yep. Yeah.
And I can look at all the podcast software companies and I can say, oh, none of the founders are podcasters. So I have an unfair advantage there. It's like Maria Konnikova, when she was doing poker, she saw that, most poker players didn't have PhDs in psychology or hadn't written books about Sherlock Holmes. So she figured out what aspects of those skills could make her more skillful in poker. And that gives her an unfair advantage. And that guy, remember that guy, Chris, he was a comedian who also was very good at freestyle rapping. Turner.
Yep.
Yeah. So he had an unfair advantage because he had all the skills of comedy and then a few skills. He wouldn't have been a successful rapper, maybe, or maybe he would have. I'm not saying, but maybe he decided he had all the skills of a successful comedian, and he threw in the skill of rap, which nobody else had, and he knows that no one else has because he studied the domain and the field. And so that gives you still need to know the domain and field to know what your unfair advantage is in the skills level, because he had to know, out of all the rappers out there in the field, does anyone else rap? And the answer was no. So he knew that this would help him skip the line like straight to the top.
Right. Well, so I'm gonna use your favorite line. So for everyone that's sitting at home that work from 9 to 5, what should they do right now?
Yeah, well, list what you want to be successful at. So you want to be successful as a hedge fund manager. You want to be successful as a stand-up comedian or a writer.
Right.
List what skills you have in writing. List the domain of writing. So again, the domain is what can you do with your skills. You could be a screenplay writer. You could be a novelist. You could be a short story writer. And which one of these seems to your skills seems to match the best.
Right.
Like for me, entrepreneurship, I had all the skills, but the domain involves being, if I want to be a CEO, the domain involves being very social, which is not me. So I have to, reconsider. And then for the field, list all the things the very specific things. Like if you want to be a short story writer, who are the short story writers out there? Where do they publish short stories? What publishing companies publish collections of short stories? What websites maybe publish collections of short stories or individual short stories like fanfiction.net?
Right.
And so that's the field. So that's the exercise you could do. And then you could say, then you go back and do it again, but now add to your skills if there's any skills that might be able to be combined with writing. Like if you happen to know a lot about podcasting, maybe write about podcasting. Or maybe if you love horror novel, if you have a skill thinking of horror novel plots, write a horror novel plot about a podcaster. And then you go back to the domain and the field, and you could keep iterating over this.
Right. And for people that don't know what their passion is, or they have no idea what to do or whatever, I felt like for those people like me, like I think they should just list down what are their existing skills, what are their existing domain, and what's their existing field, and then they can sort of start doing puzzle that way and see what you can do.
Right. Like, so Jay, like you majored in audio engineering
Right.
So this was a domain, this was an industry you were already in, but
Right.
maybe you're passionate about it. Maybe you were passionate about it. Maybe you're in the process of switching passions, but you could list what are you could also say, here are the skills of audio engineering, and here's what I have, here's what I don't.
Right.
Here's the domain of audio engineering, and here are the things I've done, here are the things I haven't. Here's the field of audio engineering. So here's the history. Here's the all the places where the best audio engineering is.
Right.
Blah blah blah. You could see what you know and what you don't know, and you could decide. Well, do I want to be a success at audio engineering? Do I want to learn these skills I don't know yet? Do I want to explore the domain parts of the domain I don't know yet? Do I want to work
Right.
at the best place. And if you don't, then you could say, okay, well, what else am I interested in? List the skills, domain, field, and then throw in the audio engineering skills into all three of those things and see how it changes those things.
Yeah.
Like what's the skills field? What's the skills domain field of an audio engineer who is interested in podcasting? And so on. You combine them.
Right. I have to clarify. I'm not saying that I don't have any passion anymore. I just saying that like I've been doing audio engineering for so long. Like, what if I want to change passions? Like, not change passion, in the sense that like the whole passion is more like, what other new things that I can do in audio engineering?
Well, like
You know?
but this is totally how to do it. So like,
Yeah.
for instance, when I switched from, you know, let's say whatever my passion was in 2014, and I got on stage and did comedy, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Well, now what do I do? What do I do next? Well, I have to list here. This is stand-up comedy. I have to list the skills, domain, field, and then figure out a plan to get good at each one of those things. And that's how you get good at that's how you switch passions. It's that simple. Let's say like right now, I want to be a podcast software entrepreneur, and I'm switching from whatever I'm doing before, you know, comedy, whatever, writing. I have to list the skills. What's the skills of a podcasting entrepreneur? What's the domain of a podcasting entrepreneur? Meaning, what are all the types of ideas I can have to be an entrepreneur in the podcasting space? And what's the field? Who are the competitors? Who are the buyers? Who are the customers? And so on like that. So that then I can say, okay, I can do this. I understand the skills domain field very well. I can get better at this really quickly and be a success at it. I hope.
Yeah, and also like you know, sometimes you do something for so long, you sort of forget how to grow too. You know.
Yeah.
You know, like sometimes, you know, some people, if they just keep doing the same thing over and over, they're like, yeah, this is just what I do, you know, like they don't think about growing themselves. Like, this is a perfect way to help yourself grow.
Well, I think this is the skills domain field of being a human. So
Right.
am I still creative, for instance, in that sense? Am I still not so, am I still working on my anxiety and my regret? I don't want to have any regrets. Like, oh, I should have like Matthew Berry says, oh, I'm a Hollywood screenwriter, but will I have regrets if I don't do something related to sports? Maria Konnikova is a PhD in psychology, but will I have regrets if I don't try poker? So, and that's the spiritual health. And, or I'm married to so-and-so. Will I have regrets if I don't marry so-and-so or be whatever? Or I'm not really in good health. Will I have regrets if I don't start exercising now? So there's always the basic foundational skills of human. And then part of that is the domain is here's all the things I can do. Am I really fit to do audio engineering? Or maybe now I'm ready to do, I have another interest. I'm ready to do podcasting. And then there's the field, which is here's all the successful people in history. Did they stick to one thing or did they do many things? Like, look, you know, Steve Jobs did many things. Like he made the world's best microcomputer, and then he made the world's best phone, and then he made the world's best music and video media player. Like,
do you know he made a world best animation studio too?
Yeah, Pixar.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he had many interests, and believe me, with Pixar, he studied the history of the movie and he figured out what are his skills in the movie business. That's why he said, you know what, I'm not an animator, so I better hire John Lasseter. Right. And I'm not. I've got a lot of things going on. So even though I know how to run a company, I better hire Ed Catmull to be the CEO because he can handle the day-to-day running of the business. And the domain is like, okay, I'm going to make movies, and you know, I know the basics of plot and stuff like that. And so he hired people to write his movies. And then the field is, well, I'm competing against Disney and DreamWorks, and here's the technologies that are coming out about animation, and I know I'm really good at that. So my unfair advantage in this business is that I know technology really well. Right. And so that goes back to the skills. And I need to win some awards at big movie festivals, so that's part of the field. And I also know how to sell a company and who to call and so on. So he sold to Disney for $6 billion. So
yeah, and then he get hired back in Apple.
Yeah. Well, that was before he even sold Pixar. He got hired back at Apple. So he was very good with the skills domain field of entrepreneurship. By the way, after he left Apple the first time, he used his skills domain field to start Next Computer, which was like think of it as like a super advanced Macintosh. So he used that skill. And the domain, he's like, well, I could sell this to consumers, but I also know I can sell this to universities. So he focused on that domain first. And the field was, okay, well, here are the universities that probably need this. Here are the best computer science departments. And here are the companies that maybe need this. And by the way, Apple's in trouble. I know the field very well. So I know Apple very well. So I'll sell Next Computer back to Apple and take over that company again.
Yeah, and that's also part of the reason why he got hired back, right? Because Apple's Mac was suffering.
Yeah, I mean, Apple was like $3 a share. Gil Amelio was the last CEO before they bought Next Computer, and I met Gil in like 1996 or 1995.
Whoa.
No, 1994 maybe. And I remember Apple was all the way down to like $3 a share. Everyone thought it was going to go bankrupt. They had a million different product lines that none of them were selling very well. It just wasn't a very good computer anymore. So Steve Jobs, because of his not only skills with computers and entrepreneurship, but specifically with Apple and his understanding of the domain in the field, he took over. He cut all the product lines down to like 3 or 4 main product lines and built up from that. And he had a very good understanding that he needed to know skills, domain, field, or at least know what he didn't know so he could outsource. So he wasn't the best programmer in the beginning, or no, he wasn't the best computer manufacturer in the beginning, so he hired Steve Wozniak. He wasn't the best, animator, but he knew a lot about animation, so he hired John Lasseter. So as long as you could you need to know what you don't know, and then you need to outsource to the best in order to be successful also. So there's lots of ways to use this framework.
Right. Wow. I felt like that's what people like your listeners should do first is like look at your life and then start writing all that down.
Well, you could look at your life, and you could look at your existing area where your existing hierarchy where you're trying to be a success in, and then you could also figure out what's the hierarchies you want to be a success in and list the skills domain field. And then you could see if you can combine them or what you have to learn if you want to use them or what you have to outsource. So that's interesting too, is that then you either have something, you have to learn something, you outsource something, or you combine something.
Right.
Or you don't do it. So there's like those 5 choices. So like, for instance, entrepreneurship, I'm not going to be the best manager in the world. So I'm just not going to do it. So I have to find ways to be an entrepreneur. If I'm going to be an entrepreneur or use that skill set, I have to find a domain and field that allow me to use the skills I want to have in entrepreneurship.
Right.
And then if I already have those skills, it's great. Or I have to learn them or I have to outsource for them.
Yeah. I felt like usually outsource, for me, I think outsource is probably better because I remember there's a podcast we talk about energy, right? The top 10 the life lessons energy, because you outsource it, then you just need less energy to learn.
Right. So that was in the Stephen Kotler podcast, The Art of Impossible. But the trick there is you have to understand if outsourcing is going to cause more energy than it's worth.
Right.
So if you're an entrepreneur but you don't like being a CEO, you could hire a CEO. But if you're not so good at hiring and the CEO is not so good, you're going to spend a lot more energy than if you had just been the CEO.
Right.
So you have to make sure what are the skills for hiring a good CEO. Is you have to be able to not be persuaded by a smooth talker and so on. Like the Apple's board hired the wrong CEO, for instance.
Right. They hired the CEO was just a marketing agency CEO.
So
right?
John Scully, who replaced Steve Jobs as CEO, he was the marketing manager he was the head of marketing for Pepsi.
Pepsi, yep.
And Steve Jobs, he didn't necessarily, because he was the CEO, he didn't really have experience hiring a CEO. And John Scully, by definition, because he's a good marketer, was good at being a smooth CEO-looking guy.
Right.
What Steve Jobs was really great at was persuasion. So he has the famous line. He said to John Scully, do you want to change the world or do you want to sell sugared water? And that convinced John Scully to switch from Pepsi to Apple.
Right. Man, so many new skills to learn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So All right. Well, for everybody listening, this was a little bit offbeat of my favorite things, but it's important to know that even if you have that if you have a list of favorite things, whether it's your favorite books, your favorite heroes, your favorite politicians, your favorite businesses, your favorite TV sitcoms, there's always lessons to be learned from them. But more importantly, or just as importantly, there's always a way you can change passions to do things related to your favorite things and maybe make money at it.
Yeah. I think that's the first thing all the listeners should do. And also, thanks for listening to the very first episodes of Jay Pondering. No, I'm just joking.
Well, all credit to Jay for turning on the record. We were just randomly talking and Jay started recording. So all credit to Jay for creating this podcast. Thank you, Jay. You're not just an audio engineer. Now you just graduated a level of to being a senior producer. At first you were an assistant producer, then a junior producer. Now you're a senior producer.
No. At first, you picked me up, from a street when I didn't know any Chinese.
Right, you didn't know any Chinese. You were just a runner for big heroin dealers. and I was saying, ni hao, you could do better than this.
That's the true story of Jay's origin story. All right, thanks, James.
All right, see you later. Bye.
Yeah, bye.
Powered by Snapdragon, the Samsung Galaxy S23 Ultra elevates your photography to epic new heights. Snapdragon processors deliver a color experience like no other, with sharp, industry-leading 8K video capture. You can also snap images in 200 megapixels, capturing more detail than ever. And those late-night blurry pics are a thing of the past, thanks to next-level night mode. Experience powerfully moving premium photography, only with Snapdragon. Follow us on Instagram at Snapdragon Official.